Hi, welcome to today's video. In this video, we're going to talk about a scenario where a friend reached out to me about a scenario where they had a cost anomaly from logic apps and how we troubleshoot this. So the scenario was that they got an alert from Turbo 360 about a cost anomaly in the system test environment. They weren't really sure kind of what to do about that. So this will really describe the process of troubleshooting this issue. So up here in Turbo 360, they've got a set up for their integration team's test environment, showing what the logic app costs are. And you can see there's a couple of things going on here. So this is looking at some of the more expensive logic apps they have. So we've got this one logic app here where we can see the green line has a usage pattern which suggests sometimes we have days where it processes a bunch of data and generally falls into like a certain amount of usage, and then other days it doesn't really do very much. But the cost anomaly really came from this one here. So this was a new logic app deployed in early May, and then this is every day sort of incurring a certain level of cost that's beyond the expectation. So that's the new cost from that's what triggered the alert. The key thing here is they weren't expecting this cost. So this green line, they have data being processed, so they were getting an expected usage out of that. But the blue one was something new got deployed. Um, it sort of created an anomaly because of the costs that were getting triggered. It also started hitting their budget monitoring as well. So when we look in, we see, right, so something's different to what we're expecting here. We need to troubleshoot this and work out what's going on. So when we do the cost review, we're looking at the consumption recently, and this is one of the key logic apps here. So recently, this one's been getting used quite a bit. We're expecting this logic app to be like these ones down here, where it's costing, $3 a month, something like that. In this month, this one had costed $82. So that's way beyond the expectation. And this logic app basically pulls service bus, processes messages, and does stuff. But we're not expecting to have enough load for it to really trigger a noticeable cost. So the first thing we did is we look at the run history down here for the logic app, and we can see, here we put a big question mark. There's no run history, so there's nothing being executed in terms of messages being processed. So why is this costing so much? So that's the first kind of question about what's going on. The next thing is that we look at the trigger history here, and we can see down here we've got a whole bunch of triggers that are failing to fire. So what's going on here? We can see that these are triggering very regularly here. So every couple of seconds, we've got an attempt to connect to service bus to trigger this logic app. So if we look at the triggers failed, we can see about the third this started, and we've really got this this constant pattern of hitting service bus to check for messages. So on this 6 hour window, you can see we're getting 12,000 plus nearly 14,000 connection attempts. This will be where the trigger's failing. So, in terms of billable actions, there's another counter actually if you change this one here, which will show you billable actions and billable triggers. So the billable triggers is really the same as this. So we're basically paying a tiny little cost every time we connect to service bus because it's a consumption logic app. And the key thing here is that because the connection's unsuccessful, so if it was a successful connection, it would connect, check for messages, and then it wouldn't check again till it's configured, or it would, depend on how you configure the connector, it may hold like a long connection open and just run a polling trigger on that. But here, because it's failing, it's aggressively attempting to reconnect again, which is why we're getting so many connection issues here. And what we found is that if you look at the error message for one of these triggers, the key bits down here, where we can see that the queue or namespace is not found. So what's happened here is that the logic app's been deployed, and either it's pointing to a queue that doesn't exist, or the queue it was dependent on hasn't been created yet. So it's just constantly trying to pull to connect a service bus to see if it can find a message that it can process. And because there's nothing there, it just keeps connecting, connecting, and connecting, and each one incurs that tiny cost, and that's how that logic app's becoming um, becoming a lot more expensive than what we were expecting. So the first thing is, how do we fix this? So the fix is that we either do one of two things: we either deploy the missing queue, or we change the logic app configuration to point to the correct queue name, and then that would either of those will be a deployment slash configuration fix. That'll correct that in the environment, and that cost will come down. I think the interesting bit is they weren't seeing the cost in the other test environment, so maybe it's just a one-off config issue in this particular test environment. The next thing is we had the monitoring that fired that alerts you to the issue, and you can see from the cost review that we could see it as well. So the other thing we could maybe think about is in a previous video we talked about a circuit breaker pattern. So that was the one where we had all these extra messages getting reprocessed because somebody accidentally was triggering the logic app. In this case here, it's incurring a cost because of a configuration error. So what we could maybe do in Turbo 360, we can put a monitor on the number of failed triggers, and we could actually use an action to make it disable the logic app in this scenario where there's a config issue. I guess that would be a circuit breaker to stop it incurring cost, but actually the other thing we could do when we deploy it is just do a sanity check to make sure that the triggers are connecting correctly as well. I think in the Turbo 360 Business Apps feature, this will be firing alerts as well to say, there's connection errors going on because you're getting failed connections, but we could configure it to have an action as well as an alert. We can have an action that says, actually, if you get more than a few hundred of these in this period, disable the logic app so somebody can come and review it. So hopefully, I think that's the last slide. This should give you a few ideas on how to handle this kind of problem. I thought it was an interesting one to share on a video. Again, this is one of these scenarios where consumption costs can be brilliant because they can be really cheap and really cost effective. But if they're misconfigured and misused, either accidentally or through a bad choice, it's quite easy that they'll scale and they'll incur cost because they were being used in a way you weren't predicting. So this is a one to watch out for. Just check that your configuration's correct and your logic app isn't incurring cost. Make sure you've got your monitoring in place, both for technical monitoring and cost monitoring. Thank you for listening to today's video, and have a great week.